Have you ever felt it? That prickling on your skin when the woods grow too quiet, or the shadows in your periphery seem to just shift? We tell ourselves it's the wind, an animal, our minds playing tricks. Sometimes, the explanation eludes us, slipping through our fingers like smoke. Welcome, brave listeners, to Shadowfall Stories, True Tales of the Unseen. I'm your guide, Oliver Dread, and tonight, we journey into those shadowed corners of experience where logic frays and the unbelievable takes root. Our first tale comes from the vast, often unforgiving wilderness of northern Michigan, the place where the trees stand ancient and watchful, and the silence of the deep woods can either be a comfort or a warning. Okay, so you know how Ben and I love getting away up north? That little cabin near Mio we rented that one October? Man, that trip, it started out so normal, you wouldn't believe how sideways things went. We drove up on a Friday afternoon, the kind where the sun is all golden and slanted, making the leaves on the trees practically glow. The air smelled like pine needles and damp earth, that classic up-north smell that just instantly relaxes you. The cabin was exactly what we expected. Rustic, a little dusty, but cozy. We dropped our bags, made some coffee, and just sat on the porch for a while, soaking it all in. It was so quiet, the only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and some distant birdsong. Peaceful, you know? That first evening, we made a fire in the wood-burning stove, cooked some pasta, and played cards. It was exactly the kind of low-key weekend we were craving. Later, after we'd gone to bed, that's when things started to feel off. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, you know, that groggy, disoriented feeling? And I thought I heard something, a faint knocking sound. It was rhythmic, almost like someone was tapping lightly on wood. I nudged Ben, but he just mumbled and rolled over. I listened again, and it was still there. Tap, tap, tap. It seemed to be coming from outside, somewhere in the woods. I figured it was probably just a branch hitting the side of the cabin in the breeze, even though I hadn't really noticed any wind earlier. I tried to ignore it, but it kept going. This soft, persistent knocking that seemed to drift around the cabin. It never got closer, never faded away completely. Eventually, I must have fallen back asleep, but that sound, it stuck with me. The next day, we decided to go for a hike on one of those old logging trails. The woods were beautiful, all those reds and oranges and yellows, but there was this heavy stillness to the air. It felt like everything was holding its breath. We walked for a couple of hours, the only sounds our own footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. Then we turned a corner on this really overgrown part of the trail, where the trees were thick and tangled, and that's when we saw it. Hanging from a low branch, almost hidden by the leaves, was this little wooden figure. It was weird, crudely carved, like something a kid might make, but unsettling. It was shaped sort of like a person, but the proportions were all wrong, and it had these big round eyes carved into its face that just stared. They were just dark holes, but they felt like they were looking right through you. I immediately felt this wave of unease wash over me. I just wanted to get away from it. "Let's just leave it," I said to Ben, my voice a little shaky. But you know Ben, he's got that curious streak. He reached out and took it down. It was surprisingly light, the wood rough and splintery. He turned it over in his hands, examining it. I kept looking around, feeling like we were being watched. The woods suddenly felt a lot less peaceful. We kept hiking, and Ben eventually tucked the little wooden thing into his backpack. I kept thinking about it, those dark, staring eyes. It just felt wrong. That night, the knocking started again. Only this time, it was louder, more insistent. It wasn't just a soft tap anymore. It was a definite thump, thump, thump against the walls. Ben, even he couldn't dismiss it as the wind this time. We both sat up in bed, listening, our hearts pounding a little faster. Then, we started hearing other things. Soft rustling sounds right outside the windows, like someone was walking through the leaves, but too deliberate, too close to be an animal. Once, and I swear I'm not making this up, we both heard this faint giggle. It sounded like a child, but it was so quick, so brittle. It just cut off abruptly, leaving this heavy silence in its wake. We were both pretty freaked out by this point, but we tried to tell ourselves it was just the woods. You know? Sounds travel in weird ways out here. Maybe it was some animals or the wind playing tricks, but deep down, I don't think either of us really believed it. The last night, that was the worst. I woke up in the middle of the night and it was freezing. Not just the normal cabin chill, but this deep, bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep into you. I could see my breath in the faint moonlight coming through the window. Ben was still asleep beside me, but I felt this overwhelming sense of dread. And then I saw it. Standing at the foot of our bed, just a dark shape in the dim light. It wasn't tall or anything, just there. But it radiated this intense feeling of wrongness, like something that shouldn't be. It felt ancient, malevolent. My throat just seized up. I couldn't scream. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I felt like it was watching me, studying me with this cold, alien intent. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever felt. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. The cold seemed to lift and I could breathe again. I practically launched myself at Ben, shaking him awake. He was groggy and confused at first, but when he saw the look on my face, the sheer terror in my eyes, he knew something was wrong. And he felt it too, that lingering chill in the air. We didn't even talk about it much. We just started throwing our stuff into our bags, our movements jerky and frantic. We were out of that cabin before sunrise. The drive back was mostly silent. We were both just processing. We never went back to that cabin. And you know that little wooden figure Ben picked up? Vanished. We never saw it again. It wasn't in his backpack when we unpacked, not in the car. It was just gone. To this day, I can't explain what happened. Was it just our imaginations running wild? Maybe, but that feeling, that cold, silent presence in the dark, it felt so real. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I still get a shiver down my spine, thinking about that dark figure, and I can't help but wonder what else might be out there, hidden in the woods of northern Michigan. Something unexplained, something scary. I'm always looking for that perfect quiet spot to really dive into my writing. Last month I thought I'd hit the jackpot, found this secluded cabin deep in the Michigan woods, the kind where the only sounds you expect are birds and the wind. Boy, was I wrong. This wasn't your average peaceful retreat. It spiraled into something else. Something I still can't quite shake. The first couple of days were exactly what I needed. Crisp, clean air that smelled like damp leaves and pine. Sunlight dappling through the trees, painting shifting patterns on the dusty cabin floor. Evenings were spent by the crackling fireplace, the silence broken only by the gentle rhythm of my typing. I felt productive, inspired. The woods outside seemed vast but benign, a silent green backdrop to my creative process. Then the night started to feel different. The usual forest sounds took on an unsettling edge. The rustling of leaves wasn't just the wind anymore. It sounded like hushed whispers. Secrets being shared just beyond the cabin walls. The shadows cast by the fire stretched and contorted in ways that made the corners of my eyes twitch. I'd catch glimpses of movement in the darkness beyond the windows, fleeting shapes that vanished the moment I turned my head. I tried to rationalize it. Fatigue, the isolation playing tricks on my mind. I'm not one to jump to supernatural conclusions. It was on the third night that I found it. Tucked away in the attic, in a trunk overflowing with forgotten relics, was a book. It looked ancient. The leather cover cracked and dry, etched with symbols that gave me a shiver just by looking at them. It felt strangely cold to the touch, heavier than it should have been. Curiosity, that fatal flaw of us horror aficionados, got the better of me. Back downstairs, by the flickering firelight, I carefully opened it. The pages were brittle and yellowed, filled with a script that looked almost medieval. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to decipher the words. They were stories. Dark, disturbing tales of people who had vanished in these very woods, their disappearances attributed to accidents or wild animals. But the way they were written, There was a chilling undercurrent, a sense of something else at play, something sinister and unseen. As I read, a cold dread seeped into the cabin. The wind outside howled through the trees, sounding less like nature and more like a mournful wail. The fire sputtered, casting frantic dancing shadows that seemed to mock the shapes in the book. I should have stopped. Every instinct screamed at me to close the damn thing and forget I ever found it. But I was hooked, drawn into the book's morbid gravity. Then I found a story with my name. Not a common name, my name. And the details of the disappearance, they mirrored events from my own past, little coincidences I'd long dismissed. A cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just a book of old legends, it felt personal. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every creak of the cabin, every snap of a twig outside, sounded like something approaching. The shadows on the walls seemed to coalesce into vague, menacing shapes. I kept seeing movement in the periphery, and now there was a distinct feeling of being watched, scrutinized by unseen eyes. The next day, the line between the stories and reality began to blur. I was staring out the window, trying to clear my head, when I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods. It looked gaunt and pale, its eyes dark and hollow, exactly like one of the vanished people from the book. It was there for a split second, then gone, swallowed by the trees. I blinked, convinced it was a trick of the light, exhaustion playing games with my vision. But then it happened again. And again. These figures pulled straight from the book's grim pages started appearing more frequently, closer to the cabin. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like puppets with tangled strings. Their faces held expressions of silent terror, their eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. Then the faces started to change. They became familiar. A childhood bully, his face contorted into a silent scream. A distant relative I'd always felt uneasy around, his eyes now burning with a malevolent light. They were twisted, grotesque versions of people from my past, figures I thought I'd left behind. They would flicker at the edge of my vision, their silent accusations chilling me to the bone. That's when the horrifying truth slammed into me. The book wasn't just telling stories, it was a conduit. By reading those dark tales, by focusing my thoughts on them, I had somehow summoned them. The characters weren't just coming to life, they were manifestations of my own buried fears, the unresolved anxieties and negative emotions I thought I had long since escaped. The woods weren't just a backdrop, they were a living, breathing entity, and it was feeding on my deepest insecurities. As dawn finally broke, casting a weak, sickly light through the trees, the apparitions seemed to recede, their presence less oppressive. But the feeling of dread lingered, a cold, suffocating weight. I knew I couldn't stay. The woods felt alive, ancient and hungry, and I had a terrifying certainty that if I didn't confront the darkness within myself, the darkness the book had unearthed, I would become the next story etched into its cursed pages. The woods demanded a sacrifice, and I had a sickening feeling it wanted me to become it. I left that cabin without a second glance. The image of those whispering trees and those haunting faces forever burned into my mind. I still get chills just thinking about it. And sometimes late at night, I swear I can still hear those faint whispers on the wind. Okay, so you know how much I love getting lost in the Porkies? That vast green wilderness just swallows you whole in the best way. I was on a solo trek last fall, aiming for some of the more remote interior trails, the ones where you can hike all day and maybe see one other soul. The air was crisp, smelling like damp leaves and that earthy richness that only comes from really old forests. Sunlight filtered down in these dappled patterns through the towering pines and hemlocks, and the only sounds were the crunch of my boots on the trail and the occasional chatter of a squirrel. It was exactly the kind of peaceful escape I needed. I'd been out for a few days, feeling that rhythm you get into when you're alone in the woods. Wake with the light, hike, find a good spot to camp, watch the stars. I was navigating mostly by map and compass that afternoon, venturing a bit off the marked trails, just exploring. The forest got denser here, the undergrowth thick with ferns and moss-covered logs. It felt ancient, like you were walking through a place that hadn't changed in centuries. Then I came to this small clearing. It wasn't particularly remarkable at first, just a little open space where the trees gave way. But in the center of it, that's where I saw it. A cairn. Now, I've seen plenty of cairns on trails, those little stacks of rocks people leave as markers. But this was different. This wasn't some haphazard pile. These were carefully chosen stones fitted together almost like puzzle pieces, forming this smooth, solid pillar that came up to about my waist. It looked deliberate, like someone had put a lot of thought and effort into building it. I stopped, just staring at it. It felt out of place, so far from any established trail. The usual forest sounds seemed to fade away in that little clearing. It was eerily quiet, almost like the woods were holding their breath. There were no signs of anyone having been there recently, no footprints in the soft earth, except maybe my own. It felt old, and then I noticed what was on top. A single stone. It was perfectly smooth, a deep, glossy black, like obsidian, but somehow richer. It was shaped like a teardrop, and as I got closer, I could feel this faint coolness radiating from it, even through the crisp air. It was the kind of cool you feel from something that's been buried deep underground. I circled the cairn slowly, my senses on high alert. I couldn't shake this feeling that I had stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. My heart started to beat a little faster. Curiosity, that old hiker's curse, started to gnaw at me. I had to know what that stone felt like. Hesitantly, I reached out and picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, surprisingly dense. As my fingers closed around it, a strange tingling sensation shot up my arm, like pins and needles, but different. And then, for just a split second, the forest around me seemed to shimmer. The greens of the trees looked impossibly vibrant, the browns of the bark deepened, and the sunlight seemed to pulse. Then, just as quickly, everything went back to normal. I blinked, wondering if I was just tired, if my eyes were playing tricks on me. I looked around the clearing again, but everything seemed the same. I placed the stone back on top of the cairn. The tingling in my arms stopped immediately. I spent the next hour trying to find any kind of trail, any indication of why this cairn might be there, who might have built it. But there was nothing, just the dense, silent woods. I marked the spot on my map, a little X in the middle of nowhere, and kept hiking. But that image, that feeling, stayed with me. Back home, I tried to research the area, looking for any mention of unusual rock formations or ancient sites deep in the Porkies. I even showed a picture I'd snapped of the stone to a geology friend, but he couldn't identify it. It wasn't anything native to the region. I've thought about going back. That curiosity still tugs at me. But there's this other feeling now, a sense of caution. Like maybe some things are meant to remain hidden in the deep woods. That unmarked cairn, that cool, heavy stone. It felt like a whisper from a part of the forest that doesn't want to be found. And sometimes I think it's better to just listen to that whisper and leave the mystery undisturbed. The memory of that silent clearing and the strange stone is enough to make me wonder what else lies hidden in those vast, green depths. You know how sometimes you just need to unplug? Like really unplug? That's why I decided on this solo camping trip deep in the Michigan woods. No phone signal, no internet, just me and nature. At first, it was exactly what I needed. The towering trees were majestic, their leaves rustling in the breeze like a gentle sigh. The air smelled clean and earthy, and the silence was profound, the kind that actually calms your mind. The first night was peaceful. I set up my tent, built a decent fire, and just sat there, watching the flames dance and listening to the crickets chirp. It felt like I was the only person on Earth, and honestly, it was kind of nice. But the second night, that's when things started to feel off. The usual nighttime sounds of the forest seemed muted, replaced by this heavy, almost suffocating silence. The shadows cast by the fire seemed to writhe and stretch in unnatural ways, and I kept getting this feeling like I was being watched from the darkness just beyond the firelight. I'd flick my head around, but there was never anything there. Just the dense, unmoving trees. Then I started hearing things. Faint whispers carried on the breeze, too indistinct to make out any words, but definitely there. Sometimes I could have sworn they were calling my name, a soft, breathy sound that sent a shiver down my spine. I chalked it up to the wind playing tricks, the isolation messing with my head. I'm usually pretty grounded, not one for spooky stuff, but this was getting under my skin. The next morning, I went to get some water from the small stream I'd found earlier. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Leading away from my tent, towards the deeper woods. They weren't mine. I wear a pretty distinct hiking boot, and these were different. Smaller, lighter, and there was a strange pattern to them, almost like the person was shuffling. My heart did this weird little flutter in my chest. I told myself it was probably just some animal, but they looked too deliberate, too human-like. That day, the feeling of being watched intensified tenfold. Every rustle in the leaves made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden form. I started to feel this constant prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone was standing right behind me, just out of sight. I kept turning around, scanning the trees, but there was never anyone there. Then I started noticing it. The way a branch would sway just after I moved. A flicker of movement at the edge of my vision that mirrored my own step. It was subtle at first, easy to dismiss as coincidence. But it kept happening. If I stopped to look at a bird, I'd catch a glimpse of something dark and still in the trees, mimicking my posture. If I knelt down to tie my boot, I'd see a fleeting shadow mirroring that movement too. The realization hit me slowly, a cold dread seeping into my bones. I wasn't alone out here, and whatever was with me wasn't just observing. It was mimicking me, mocking me. It felt like some kind of twisted game. Days blurred into a terrifying cycle. I'd try to hike out, but every path seemed to lead me deeper into the woods. The mimicking continued, becoming bolder. I started seeing it more clearly now. A gaunt, shadowy figure just at the edge of my sight, its movements a distorted reflection of my own. It never made a sound, never fully revealed itself, but its presence was a constant, suffocating weight. Sleep became a nightmare. Every rustle outside my tent sounded like it was right next to me. The whispers at night grew louder, more insistent, sometimes sounding like my own voice, distorted and mocking. I was losing it, the isolation and the constant fear chipping away at my sanity. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was losing myself. My thoughts became clouded, my memories fuzzy. It was like the woods themselves were trying to erase me, to absorb me into their silent, watchful depths. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I couldn't keep running. Whatever this thing was, it was always a step ahead, always mirroring me, always enjoying my growing terror. The only way out was to confront it, to face the thing that seemed to know my every move, perhaps even my deepest fears. The last thing I remember clearly was stopping in a small clearing, the silence heavier than ever. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and called out into the empty woods, my voice trembling. "I know you're there. Show yourself." The air grew cold, the whispering intensified, swirling around me like a suffocating shroud. And then, I saw it. Just at the edge of the trees, a figure began to coalesce from the shadows. It looked vaguely human, but its features were blurred, indistinct, like a reflection in disturbed water. And as it moved, it mirrored my own stance, my own fear-stricken posture. What happened next, I'm not entirely sure. There was a sound, a high-pitched whine that seemed to pierce my very skull. And then, nothing. I woke up days later at the edge of the woods, disoriented and weak, with no memory of how I got there. My campsite was gone. There were no footprints but my own. Was it a dream? Did the isolation finally break me? Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I catch a fleeting glimpse of something else behind my reflection. A shadow that mimics my movements just a fraction of a second too late. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear those whispers, just at the edge of my hearing, sounding eerily like my own name. I don't go into the woods alone anymore, and I don't think I ever will again. Whatever was out there, it's still out there, watching, waiting, and maybe, just maybe, a part of it came back with me. Hiking has always been my escape, my way to reconnect with nature and find some peace. My dad used to take me out into the woods all the time when I was a kid, taught me how to read the trails, respect the silence. But this trip I took last fall, deep in some uncharted territory in Michigan, it twisted those comforting memories into something truly terrifying. See, my dad, he loved the wilderness, maybe a little too much. He disappeared out on a solo hike about 5 years back. They never found his body, just his backpack near a ravine. The official report was an accident, but a part of me always wondered if it was something else. The woods always felt a little different after that. Beautiful, sure, but also like they held a secret, a silent claim. This particular trail I was on that day was unmarked, something I'd found on an old faded map at a local antique shop. It promised untouched beauty, and for the first few hours, it delivered. Sunlight dripped through the canopy, painting the mossy ground in emerald hues. The air smelled like damp earth and decaying leaves, that earthy scent that always used to remind me of Dad. There was a peaceful stillness, broken only by the occasional chirping of birds. Then I stumbled upon it. This grove, tucked away like a secret the forest was guarding. Trees here were ancient, their bark thick and gnarled, their branches intertwined like skeletal fingers reaching skyward. Even in the bright afternoon light, a chill settled over me. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and an unnatural silence hung in the grove. It was like stepping into a forgotten world, a place where the usual rules of nature didn't apply. As I ventured deeper, a prickle of unease crawled up my spine. It wasn't just the silence, it was a feeling of being watched, scrutinized by something unseen within the dense foliage. The trees seemed to loom over me, their shadows stretching and distorting in a way that played tricks on my eyes. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the memory of Dad, the inherent risk of being alone in the wilderness. But then dusk began to bleed across the sky, painting the leaves in shades of blood orange and deep violet, and the grove became truly menacing. The shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, and every snap of a twig underfoot echoed with an unnerving clarity. Then I heard it, a soft rustling behind me, like something dragging itself through the undergrowth. I spun around, heart hammering, but there was nothing. Just the deepening gloom and the silent, towering trees. That's when the real fear took hold. A cold, paralyzing dread that went beyond the usual hiker jitters. With every step I took, the woods seemed to actively resist me. Twisted roots, like grasping skeletal hands, snaked across the path. Thorns, sharp and unforgiving, tore at my clothes and skin. It felt like the very forest was trying to ensnare me, to claim me as its own. I fumbled for my phone, a desperate lifeline, but the screen remained stubbornly black. Dead, just like Dad's last hike. The darkness was a living thing now, pressing in from all sides. Every rustle, every sigh of the wind through the branches sounded like approaching footsteps, like hushed whispers just beyond my hearing. Memories of Dad's disappearance flooded my mind, the unanswered questions, the gnawing uncertainty. Had he felt this same creeping dread in his final moments? Then came the truly unsettling part. I stumbled on loose stones, falling heavily, and a cry of fear escaped my lips. The sound seemed to hang in the air, that echoed distorted and drawn out, almost hungry. And then I heard other sounds woven into my fading cry, faint, almost childlike whimpers and hushed, desperate pleas that seemed to come from all around me. As I lay there, the cold dampness seeping into my clothes, a horrifying realization dawned. The woods weren't just a place, they were an entity. It was feeding, not just on my fear, but on the lingering terror of everyone who had ever been lost within its depths. Each scream, each moment of despair was absorbed, amplified, drawing in more lost souls, trapping them in an endless cycle of terror. The whispers weren't the wind. They were the echoes of their fear, reaching out. The image of Dad, lost and alone in these same woods, flashed through my mind. Was he one of those whispers now? Was his fear part of this living nightmare? The thought was almost unbearable. I knew then that the only way out wasn't to succumb to the panic, to become another echo in the trees. It was to confront the very thing that had haunted me for years. The fear of the unknown, the fear that had swallowed my father whole. I don't know how long I lay there, forcing myself to breathe, to find some semblance of calm amidst the rising terror. Slowly, I pushed myself up, my body aching, my heart still pounding. The woods remained silent, watchful, but something had shifted. The crushing weight of fear had eased, just a fraction. I started to walk, each step a conscious act of defiance, focusing on the feel of the earth beneath my feet, the sound of my own ragged breath. Dawn eventually bled across the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows through the trees. The grove looked different in the pale light, still eerie, but somehow less dominant. I eventually stumbled upon a faint trail and hours later found my way back to civilization. But even now, the memory of that grove chills me to the bone. Sometimes, when the wind rustles the leaves outside my window, I hear those faint whispers, those echoes of terror. And I know, deep down, that the woods remember. They always remember. And a part of me will always wonder if I truly escaped, or if a piece of me remains there, a silent echo in the green abyss, forever searching for a way out, just like Dad. We were all buzzing with excitement on the drive up. Liam was cracking his usual terrible jokes, Maya was meticulously going over the fishing gear, and Ben was just his quiet, observant self, taking in the passing scenery. I was in the back, half listening to their chatter, half lost in my own thoughts about finally escaping the city noise for a few days of peace. The air started to smell different as we got further north, that crisp, piney scent that just screams wilderness. When we finally reached the lake, tucked deep within this thick, ancient-looking forest, a weird stillness hung in the air. It wasn't the peaceful quiet you'd expect. It was heavy, almost like the woods were holding their breath. The towering pines surrounding the water looked less majestic and more like silent, watchful sentinels. I remember thinking it was beautiful, in a stark, almost unsettling way. The water was like glass, reflecting the dense canopy above with perfect clarity. But there wasn't a ripple, not a single bird sound. It was too perfect, you know? We set up camp as the last of the sunlight bled through the trees. Our initial excitement started to feel a little forced, our laughter echoing a bit too loudly in the unnatural silence. As darkness crept in, the shadows stretched and twisted in ways that didn't seem quite right, long and distorted like fingers reaching out. Then, we started hearing it. Faint whispers carried on the breeze, just at the edge of hearing. We all looked at each other, a little unnerved, and chalked it up to the wind playing tricks. But as the night deepened, the whispers grew clearer, and that's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. They sounded familiar, like echoes of voices we knew, voices of friends we'd lost years ago. It was faint, distorted, but undeniably there. We huddled closer around the crackling fire, the flames casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock us. I kept getting this prickling feeling, like we were being watched by 100 unseen eyes. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded amplified, loaded with some unspoken threat. The next morning, the oppressive stillness on the lake was even more pronounced. The water was like a dark mirror, and as we rowed out in the old wooden boat, it felt like we were gliding over something ancient and unknowable. Then the weather changed in an instant. One minute, the sky was a hazy blue. The next, dark clouds rolled in with terrifying speed. The wind howled, whipping the lake into a frenzy. Panic flared in my chest as the boat bucked violently. We tried desperately to row back to shore, but a rogue wave slammed into the side, and we were all thrown into the icy water. The cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. I thrashed, trying to get my bearings. but something felt off. It wasn't just the struggle against the waves. There was a pull, a dragging sensation from below. I saw Liam's face, contorted in fear, as he went under, his hand reaching for the surface for a fleeting moment before disappearing. Maya screamed, her eyes wide with terror, before she too was dragged down. My mind raced. Fragments of old arguments, forgotten promises, moments of selfishness flashed through my head. Guilt, sharp and cold as the water, pierced through the fear. It felt like more than just the lake pulling us under. It felt intentional. Ben was closest to me, his face pale and etched with a terror I'd never seen. He reached out, his hand gripping mine with surprising strength. But then, his eyes widened in disbelief, his grip loosened, and he was gone, pulled down with a sickening finality. I was alone, the surface of the churning water the only barrier between me and whatever lurked beneath. I finally managed to swim, driven by a primal fear, back towards the shore. The woods seemed different now, darker. The trees twisted into grotesque shapes. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every rustle of leaves sounded like a whispered accusation. It wasn't the peaceful escape we'd imagined. It was a twisted reflection of our deepest fears and regrets. Each night that followed was a living nightmare. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, taunting us with our past mistakes, our betrayals. We were trapped, not just by the woods but by something far more sinister. One by one, we vanished. Liam, then Maya, then Ben. Each disappearance more horrifying than the last, leaving the remaining few of us consumed by paranoia and a gnawing sense of dread. We started turning on each other, suspicion poisoning the bonds of our friendship. Finally, it was just Sarah and me. We huddled by a dying fire, the shadows dancing like demons around us. The whispers were relentless now, weaving through the trees, revealing our deepest, darkest secrets. We knew, with a chilling certainty, that the fishing trip had been a lie. We had been lured here. Then we saw it, a shimmering, malevolent form rising from the depths of the lake, its eyes burning with an ancient, cold fury. It spoke, its voice a chorus of the lost, demanding a price for our freedom. A sacrifice. One of us had to be given. Panic clawed at my throat. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. In that horrifying moment, something inside me snapped. The fear, the exhaustion, the sheer will to survive overwhelmed everything else. I pushed her forward, just a little. Enough for the shadowy tendrils that snaked out from the lake to reach her. Her scream was cut short as she was dragged beneath the surface, the water swallowing her whole without a ripple. The woods fell silent again. The lake returned to its placid, deceptive calm. I stumbled back through the trees, a hollow ache in my chest where my friends used to be. I made it back to civilization, but the whispers followed me. They're always there. A constant, chilling reminder of what happened at that lake, of what I did. I can still see Sarah's face, her eyes filled with betrayal in those final moments. I'll never find peace. The guilt, it's a constant companion, a shadow that will never leave. That fishing trip, it cost us more than just a few days. It cost us everything. And that brings us to the end of another journey into the heart of the unexplained. We hope you found this exploration as fascinating and thought-provoking as we did. If you're intrigued by these mysteries and want to join us for more, be sure to hit that like button, share this video with anyone who loves a good mystery, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss an update. We truly appreciate your support, and we've got many more strange tales to share with you in the future.